Most people destroy their own power because they talk too much, explain too much, react too much, and desperately need to be understood. But the most dangerous person in any room is never the loudest. It is the calmest. The one who no longer needs validation. The one who can remain silent while everyone else loses emotional control. Silence is not weakness. Silence is control. Silence is discipline. Silence is invisible power. And the moment you master silence, your reality begins to change. Because people can manipulate your emotions, but they cannot manipulate a mind that no longer reacts. Most people are exhausted because they are constantly defending their existence. Defending their choices. Defending their boundaries. Defending their dreams. Defending their personality. Defending their decisions to people who were never going to understand them anyway. And they call this communication. But it is not communication. It is insecurity. That is the truth most people never want to confront. Every unnecessary explanation is usually rooted in fear. Fear of rejection. Fear of judgment. Fear of being misunderstood. Fear of disappointing someone. Fear of losing approval. So people explain. And explain. And explain again. Not because the other person truly needs clarity, but because they desperately want emotional permission. That is the trap. You have a choice. You can continue living as someone who constantly seeks approval from the world around you. Or you can become someone who understands a deeper truth. Confidence does not defend itself. Read that again. Confidence does not defend itself. A mountain does not explain why it stands tall. The ocean does not apologize for its depth. The lion does not seek permission from the sheep before it moves. Real confidence is quiet. But insecure people cannot tolerate silence. The moment someone questions them, they panic internally. They rush to justify themselves. They start over-talking, oversharing, over-explaining. And the more they explain, the weaker they appear psychologically. Because excessive explanation communicates uncertainty. Think about the most powerful people you have ever met. They speak clearly, briefly, directly. Then they stop talking. They do not chase agreement from everyone in the room. That's the key. A truly confident person understands something emotionally weak people never understand. Not everyone needs to agree with you. You do not need universal approval to move forward in life. You do not need their permission. Look at successful entrepreneurs, elite athletes, military leaders, high-level performers. Do you think they spend their lives explaining every decision to people who doubt them? No. Because they understand something important. Results speak louder than explanations. The insecure person talks endlessly about what they are going to do. The disciplined person disappears quietly and does it. That is power. And most people never develop it because they are addicted to validation. Validation addiction is one of the greatest silent destroyers of inner power. Because the moment your emotional stability depends on other people understanding you, you become emotionally controlled by them. Now your mood depends on their approval. Your confidence depends on their reactions. Your peace depends on their acceptance. That is weakness. And society rewards this weakness constantly. People are trained from childhood to seek external approval. Do they like me? Do they agree with me? Am I accepted? Did I offend someone? What will people think? So they build entire personalities around emotional survival. But Stoic energy operates differently. Stoic energy says, I know who I am even when others misunderstand me. That is freedom. Most people cannot handle being misunderstood. They would rather betray themselves than disappoint strangers. Think about how many people stay trapped in lives they hate because they are terrified of judgment. They explain their dreams away. They explain their boundaries away. They explain their standards away. And every explanation silently says the same thing. Please approve of me. That sentence destroys power. Because the more approval you seek, the less authority you naturally project. You have a choice. You can spend your life trying to make everyone comfortable. Or you can become internally strong enough to tolerate misunderstanding. Because the truth is this. Some people will misunderstand you no matter what you say. Some people already decided who you are before you even opened your mouth. Some people are committed to misunderstanding you because it protects their ego. That means over-explaining is often useless. And deep down, you already know that. But emotionally dependent people continue doing it because they fear rejection more than they value self-respect. That's the real issue. It's not about communication. It's about discipline. Emotional discipline. The discipline to stop chasing validation from people who do not control your future. The discipline to let silence do the work. Because silence is powerful in ways most people completely fail to understand. Silence creates psychological authority. When you remain calm without rushing to defend yourself, people automatically begin projecting strength onto you. Why? Because emotional control is rare. Most people are reactive, impulsive, emotionally loud. So when someone remains grounded under pressure, it disrupts expectations. Silence forces the world to interpret your strength. That is why calm people often appear more powerful than loud people. Because silence creates mystery. And mystery creates psychological weight. The less reactive you become, the more emotionally untouchable you appear. Now understand this clearly. Silence is not weakness. Silence is control. Weak people cannot stay silent. They must react immediately. They must defend themselves instantly. They must prove themselves constantly. Strong people observe first. They pause. They think. They choose their words carefully. Sometimes they choose no words at all. That restraint creates power. Imagine two people during conflict. One becomes emotional instantly, talking loudly, defending every point aggressively, trying desperately to win. The other remains calm, measured, controlled. Who appears stronger? The calm one. Always. Because emotional control signals internal stability. And internal stability is what people unconsciously respect. That's the key. Your goal is not to become cold. Your goal is to become disciplined. There is a difference. Cold people suppress emotion. Disciplined people control emotion. One is weakness disguised as toughness. The other is mastery. And mastery begins the moment you stop needing everyone to understand you. You do not owe endless explanations for your boundaries. You do not owe endless explanations for your growth. You do not owe endless explanations for protecting your peace. You have a choice. You can continue leaking energy trying to convince everyone. Or you can become someone who moves with quiet certainty. Someone who understands that confidence does not defend itself. From this day forward, begin practicing restraint. When you feel the urge to over-explain, pause. When you feel desperate to prove yourself, pause. When you feel emotionally pressured to gain approval, pause. Ask yourself, am I communicating, or am I seeking permission? That question changes everything. Because real power begins when your actions no longer require applause. Silence forces you to build internal validation. And internal validation creates unshakable confidence. This is why mastering silence changes your reality. People begin responding differently to you. Not because you became louder, but because you became grounded. You stopped reacting emotionally. You stopped explaining endlessly. You stopped chasing approval. And in that silence, something powerful begins to emerge. Authority. You mastered the need for validation. Now let's go deeper. Because silence alone is not enough. You must understand how calm energy changes every room you enter. Most people misunderstand power. They think power is loud, aggressive, dominant, always speaking, always reacting, always demanding attention. But real power rarely looks like that. Real power is controlled. Real power is calm. Real power can sit in silence without feeling weak. That's the difference. Emotionally unstable people are uncomfortable with silence because silence exposes insecurity. The moment a room becomes quiet, insecure people feel pressure. Pressure to speak. Pressure to impress. Pressure to entertain. Pressure to prove they matter. So they fill the silence endlessly. Talking too much. Laughing too loudly. Explaining too much. Reacting emotionally to everything around them. And they mistake this emotional noise for confidence. But it is not confidence. It is anxiety trying to disguise itself as strength. That's the key. Weak energy is usually loud energy. Because weak people are desperate to control how others perceive them. Strong people do not carry that desperation. Look carefully at truly powerful individuals. Elite athletes before a championship match. Military commanders under pressure. High-level executives in critical negotiations. Notice something. They are rarely frantic. Rarely emotional. Rarely loud. They speak slowly. Deliberately. With control. Because calmness signals certainty. And certainty creates authority. The person who panics emotionally loses influence immediately. The person who stays grounded controls the emotional direction of the room. You have a choice. You can become emotionally reactive like everyone else. Or you can train yourself to become the calmest presence in the environment. Because the calmest nervous system becomes the strongest energy in the room. Read that again. The calmest nervous system becomes the strongest energy in the room. This is not motivational language. This is psychological reality. Human beings constantly read emotional signals subconsciously. People feel nervous around unstable energy. They trust grounded energy. They respect controlled energy. That means emotional discipline is not just internal. It changes how people respond to you externally. Silence communicates certainty without words. Think about that deeply. Someone who constantly interrupts silence usually fears judgment internally. But someone who can sit calmly without rushing to speak sends a completely different message. I do not need to perform for acceptance. That energy is rare. And rarity creates influence. Most people today are performers. Not thinkers. Not observers. Performers. Especially in the age of social media. Everyone is broadcasting constantly. Showing everything. Sharing everything. Explaining everything. Seeking endless reactions from strangers. And the more attention people receive, the more emotionally dependent they become on that attention. Now their self-worth depends on engagement. Likes. Comments. Views. Approval. That is dangerous. Because once external attention becomes your emotional fuel, silence feels unbearable. Now you cannot sit alone peacefully. You cannot exist without stimulation. You cannot feel valuable unless someone is watching. That is not confidence. That is addiction. And millions of people are trapped inside it. They are not building inner power. They are building emotional dependency. That's why they constantly perform. Even in real life. They enter rooms trying to impress everyone immediately. Talking too much. Trying too hard. Forcing humor. Forcing personality. Forcing significance. But forcing attention destroys presence. Presence is not charisma. Presence is emotional stability. That's the key. People think presence comes from having the loudest personality in the room. Wrong. Presence comes from nervous system control. The person who remains emotionally centered while everyone else becomes reactive naturally gains authority. This is why certain individuals command respect without saying much. Their energy is organized internally. Their emotions are disciplined. Their silence feels intentional instead of insecure. That changes everything. Because there are two types of silence. Weak silence. And powerful silence. Weak silence comes from fear. Powerful silence comes from certainty. One hides. The other observes. One fears judgment. The other no longer depends on approval. And people can feel the difference instantly. You do not need to dominate conversations to command respect. You do not need their permission. You do not need to impress everyone around you. In fact, the more you chase admiration, the less magnetic you become. Because desperation always leaks through behavior. People can feel when someone is trying too hard. trying too hard to sound intelligent, trying too hard to appear successful, trying too hard to be liked. And ironically, that effort weakens attraction. Silent confidence attracts naturally because it does not chase attention. That is why emotionally grounded individuals often become the most respected people in any environment. Not because they demand attention, but because they are not dependent on it. There is a massive difference. One says, "Please notice me." The other says, "I already know my value." That internal difference changes posture, tone, eye contact, movement, speech patterns, energy. Everything changes. You have probably experienced this yourself. You meet someone who barely speaks, yet their presence feels strong immediately. Why? Because they are comfortable with themselves. Comfort creates calmness. Calmness creates authority. Authority creates attraction. Meanwhile, insecure people try to manufacture authority externally. Through loudness. Through dominance. Through endless talking. But manufactured confidence always collapses under pressure. Real confidence remains stable in silence. That's the difference. Now understand something important. This chapter is not teaching you to become socially cold. It is teaching you to stop performing emotionally. There is a difference. Emotionally disciplined people still communicate, still connect, still laugh, still lead. But they do not leak energy constantly trying to prove themselves. That is what you must stop doing. Stop entering rooms trying to earn significance immediately. Stop talking simply because silence feels uncomfortable. Stop interrupting your own peace just to maintain attention. Instead, observe more. Listen more. Slow down your speech. Slow down your reactions. Slow down your nervous system. Because controlled people create controlled environments. That is leadership. And leadership begins internally before it appears externally. This is why elite performers train emotional regulation relentlessly. Athletes focus on breathing under pressure. Soldiers focus on calmness under chaos. Leaders focus on emotional control during uncertainty. Because panic spreads. But calmness spreads too. You have a choice. You can contribute emotional chaos to every room you enter. Or you can become the person who stabilizes the environment. The person who does not emotionally collapse under pressure. The person who does not need constant validation. The person whose silence carries weight. That is power. And the beautiful part is this. You do not need to fake it. You train it. That's the key. It's not about personality. It's about discipline. The discipline to stop performing. The discipline to stop chasing attention. The discipline to remain grounded while others become emotional. And once you master that discipline, something changes permanently. People begin taking your words more seriously. Your presence becomes stronger. Your reactions become intentional instead of automatic. You stop entering rooms seeking approval. And start entering rooms with calm certainty. That certainty changes your reality. Because people respond differently to emotionally stable individuals. The world trusts grounded energy. The world respects controlled energy. The world follows calm leadership. And all of it begins with silence. You learn to stop explaining yourself. Now you must master something even deeper. Control over your reactions. Because every emotional reaction is either strengthening your power, or giving it away. Most people are not controlled by circumstances. They are controlled by their reactions to circumstances. That is the real prison. Not the event itself. Not the criticism. Not the conflict. Not the stress. The reaction. Because the average person reacts emotionally to almost everything. Someone disagrees with them, they react. Someone criticizes them, they react. Someone ignores them, they react. Someone offends them online, they react. And every reaction drains energy. That's the key. Every emotional reaction gives away power. Especially impulsive reactions. Anger. Defensiveness. Arguing endlessly. Explaining emotionally. Trying to win every conflict. All of it reveals the same thing. Inner instability. Strong people do not lose control every time life becomes uncomfortable. Weak people do. That truth is difficult for many people to accept because modern culture normalizes emotional impulsiveness. People proudly say, "That's just how I am." No. That is not personality. That is lack of discipline. It's not about emotion. It's about control. You have a choice. You can continue reacting automatically like everyone else. Or you can become someone who chooses responses consciously. That is Stoic energy. Stoic energy is not emotionlessness. It is emotional mastery. It means you feel emotion without becoming enslaved by it. That is power. Because if they can control your emotions, they control you. Read that again carefully. If they can control your emotions, they control you. The moment another person can predict your reaction, they gain influence over your behavior. That is why manipulative people study emotional triggers constantly. They know reactive people are easy to control. Easy to provoke. Easy to distract. Easy to destabilize. A manipulative person does not always need to overpower you physically. Sometimes they only need to provoke you emotionally. And once you react impulsively, you lose clarity. You say things you regret. Make decisions emotionally. Destroy opportunities. Damage relationships. Create unnecessary chaos. All because you lacked emotional discipline for a few moments. Think about how many lives have been destroyed by temporary emotional reactions. A single angry outburst. A reckless text message. An emotional decision during conflict. A reaction posted publicly online. One moment. One impulsive reaction. And the consequences last for years. That is why emotional control is one of the highest forms of intelligence. Because calm people see clearly. Reactive people do not. Silence interrupts emotional manipulation. That's why silence is so powerful. Manipulative people survive on emotional fuel. Drama requires participation. Conflict requires reaction. Toxic people require emotional engagement. When you stop reacting emotionally, you remove their power source. And many people cannot tolerate that. Especially toxic individuals. They will push harder. Talk louder. Create more chaos. Attempt stronger emotional reactions. Why? Because your silence frustrates their need for control. That's the key. Silence removes fuel from conflict. Think about workplace politics. One emotionally reactive employee becomes trapped in endless office drama. Arguing. Defending themselves constantly. Taking everything personally. Meanwhile, emotionally disciplined individuals observe quietly. They remain professional. Controlled. Selective with words. And over time, who gains more respect? Usually the calm one. Because emotional stability creates trust. Now think about toxic relationships. Manipulative partners often survive through emotional destabilization. They provoke reactions intentionally. Criticism. Guilt. Silent treatment. Emotional games. Why? Because emotional chaos creates control. But the moment someone becomes emotionally grounded, the manipulation weakens. Because calm people are difficult to manipulate. You cannot emotionally control someone who refuses to react impulsively. You have a choice. You can continue feeding emotional chaos. Or you can become disciplined enough to interrupt it. That begins with silence. Not weak silence. Controlled silence. There is a difference. Weak silence avoids conflict because of fear. Powerful silence avoids unnecessary conflict because of wisdom. One comes from insecurity. The other comes from self-mastery. That distinction changes everything. Now understand this clearly. Detachment does not mean you stop caring. Detachment means you stop allowing emotions to dominate your behavior. Most people misunderstand emotional detachment completely. They think detached people are cold, disconnected, emotionless, uncaring. Wrong. True detachment is emotional freedom. It means your peace is no longer controlled by every external event. It means you can experience emotion without drowning inside it. That is strength. Because reactive people destroy opportunities constantly. They ruin relationships impulsively. Ruin careers impulsively. Ruin reputations impulsively. Not because life defeated them. Because emotion defeated them. Calm people think clearly while reactive people think emotionally. And emotional thinking under pressure is dangerous. Imagine two individuals facing the same crisis. One panics instantly. Overreacts. Complains. Blames everyone around them. The other pauses. Breathes. Observes carefully. Who makes better decisions? Always the calm one. Because silence allows logic to overpower emotion. That's the key. Silence creates space. And space creates clarity. Most people never pause long enough to think clearly. They react before understanding the situation fully. That is why emotional discipline must become a daily practice. Not occasionally. Daily. You train it the same way athletes train the body. Every time you feel triggered emotionally, pause. Not for others. For yourself. Pause before responding to criticism. Pause before replying in anger. Pause before defending yourself emotionally. Ask. Will this reaction strengthen my life, or weaken it? That question changes behavior. Because many reactions feel powerful temporarily, but create weakness long term. Winning arguments is not always winning life. That's something emotionally immature people never understand. Sometimes silence is more powerful than proving a point. Sometimes walking away is stronger than emotional confrontation. Sometimes calmness wins where aggression fails. You do not need their permission to protect your peace. And protecting your peace is not weakness. It is intelligence. Most people are emotionally exhausted because they are constantly engaging with unnecessary conflict. Online arguments. Drama. Gossip. Toxic conversations. Pointless emotional battles. Every reaction costs energy. And energy is your most valuable resource. That means emotional discipline is not optional. It is survival. Especially in a world addicted to outrage. Modern culture rewards emotional impulsiveness. People are encouraged to react instantly to everything. Immediately offended. Immediately angry. Immediately emotional. But emotionally reactive societies create emotionally weak individuals. Strong individuals slow themselves down intentionally. That's the key. Slow reactions. Slow breathing. Slow speech. Slow emotional escalation. Because controlled people remain dangerous under pressure. Uncontrolled people collapse under pressure. You have a choice. You can become emotionally available to every distraction in the world. Or you can become someone whose inner state is protected carefully. Someone who does not surrender emotional control to random people. Someone who understands that silence is not passive. Silence is strategic. And the more emotionally disciplined you become, the more untouchable your mind becomes. That changes your reality completely. Because life rewards emotional stability. Relationships improve. Decision-making improves. Leadership improves. Self-respect improves. Everything changes when your emotions stop controlling your behavior. You mastered silence in communication. Now you must learn something deeper. How to stop wasting your life chasing attention and external approval. Because attention is not power. Most people are chasing attention instead of building power. And they do not even realize it. They confuse visibility with influence. Noise with importance. Attention with respect. But those things are not the same. Attention is easy to get. Power is difficult to build. That's the key. Attention is temporary. Power is permanent. Read that again. Attention is temporary. Power is permanent. A person can become viral overnight and forgotten a week later. A person can dominate conversations constantly and still have no real influence. A person can attract endless attention online while remaining emotionally weak internally. Because visibility is not strength. And modern culture has trained people to become addicted to visibility. Everyone wants to be seen. Seen posting. Seen winning. Seen grinding. Seen succeeding. Seen evolving. But truly powerful people understand something different. Real growth often happens in silence. Without applause. Without validation. Without constant announcements. That is why loud people often remain stuck. Because they spend more energy performing progress than creating progress. They announce goals constantly. Talk about plans constantly. Seek approval constantly. And the emotional reward of attention tricks the brain into feeling productive, before real work is even done. That is dangerous. Because external attention can become a substitute for real achievement. You have a choice. You can become addicted to looking successful. Or you can quietly become successful. Those are completely different paths. One focuses on appearance. The other focuses on discipline. It's not about visibility. It's about consistency. Think about elite athletes. The public sees the championship moment. But they do not see the silent years. The early mornings. The painful repetitions. The lonely discipline. The sacrifice nobody applauded. Real power was built long before the world noticed. The same is true for entrepreneurs. People celebrate successful companies publicly. But they ignore the years of private struggle. The sleepless nights. The uncertainty. The rejection. The invisible work. That is where power is built. In silence. That is why "move in silence" is not just motivational language. It is strategy. Move in silence. Repeat that to yourself. Move in silence. Because silence protects momentum. Oversharing destroys momentum. The moment many people announce a goal publicly, something strange happens psychologically. Their focus weakens. Why? Because talking creates emotional release. They receive validation before achieving anything. People congratulate them too early. Encourage them too early. Praise them too early. And slowly the hunger disappears. The discipline fades. Now they are more focused on maintaining an image than building results. That is the trap. Real builders understand this deeply. They work privately. Then they reveal results later. Not because they are hiding. Because they are protecting energy. That's the key. Inner power grows in privacy. Most goals are fragile in the beginning. Most dreams are vulnerable in the beginning. And when something is still developing, external opinions can poison it. Doubt. Criticism. Negativity. Jealousy. Weak minds absorb external noise too easily. That is why silence matters. Silence creates protection. You do not need their permission to improve your life quietly. You do not need to announce every move. You do not need to explain your discipline to people who are committed to distraction. Some people talk constantly because silence forces them to confront themselves. But disciplined individuals learn to work without external stimulation. That is rare. Because modern culture trains people to seek constant emotional rewards. Post the workout immediately. Post the business idea immediately. Post the relationship immediately. Post the success immediately. Everything becomes performance. But performance weakens focus. Because attention divides energy. A focused mind protects energy carefully. A distracted mind leaks energy everywhere. That is why many talented people never become powerful. Not because they lack ability. Because they lack restraint. They tell everyone their plans too early. Seek emotional approval too often. Invite too many opinions into unfinished goals. And slowly their vision becomes diluted. You have a choice. You can continue broadcasting your life constantly. Or you can become disciplined enough to build quietly. That discipline changes everything. Because silence sharpens focus. When nobody is watching, your relationship with discipline becomes honest. Now there is no applause. No validation. No recognition. Only the work. And that is where true identity is built. Anyone can look motivated publicly. Few people remain committed privately. That's the difference. That's power. Look carefully at highly disciplined individuals. They are usually not emotionally loud. They are focused. Grounded. Intentional. They understand that energy spent impressing others is energy stolen from growth. That is why calm people often outperform loud people long term. Because while loud people seek attention, silent people build skill. And skill creates lasting confidence. Not fake confidence. Real confidence. The kind that does not depend on reactions from strangers. The kind that remains stable even when nobody notices. That is dangerous power. Because externally validated people collapse when attention disappears. But internally disciplined people continue building regardless. That's the key. Your ability to work without recognition determines your future. Can you stay focused without applause? Can you improve without external validation? Can you remain disciplined without attention? Most people cannot. That is why they remain emotionally dependent. Always needing encouragement. Always needing approval. Always needing to be seen. But powerful individuals understand something deeper. Privacy creates strength. Silence creates clarity. Focus creates results. You do not need to convince people you are improving. Let your life reveal it naturally. Because real power does not announce itself constantly. It becomes undeniable over time. And understand this clearly. Protecting your energy is not antisocial. It is intelligent. Every conversation affects focus. Every opinion affects mindset. Every distraction affects discipline. That means your environment matters deeply. Especially during transformation. You cannot constantly expose yourself to noise and expect inner peace. That is impossible. Strong minds learn selective silence. Selective attention. Selective energy investment. Because not everything deserves access to your mind. That is maturity. The weak tell everyone everything. The strong become intentional. They choose carefully what to reveal. Not from fear. From discipline. It's not about secrecy. It's about protection. Protection of focus. Protection of momentum. Protection of peace. And once you understand this, your entire life changes. You stop chasing attention emotionally. You stop performing constantly. You stop needing external recognition to feel valuable. Now your energy becomes directed inward. Toward growth. Toward discipline. Toward mastery. That is when power begins compounding quietly. And eventually the results become impossible to hide. Because true power does not need constant advertisement. It reveals itself naturally through presence, discipline, and results. Attention fades quickly. But real power transforms your entire reality permanently. You learned how silence protects your energy. Now you must understand how silence transforms your mind itself. Because emotional discipline is not weakness. It is the foundation of inner freedom. Most people believe stoicism means becoming cold. Emotionless. Detached from humanity. Disconnected from feeling. That is not stoicism. Real stoicism is emotional command. That's the key. Stoicism is not the absence of emotion. It is control over emotion. Weak people are controlled by feelings. Strong people feel deeply, but respond strategically. There is a massive difference. Anyone can stay calm when life feels easy. But pressure reveals emotional discipline. Pressure reveals who truly controls themselves. This is why Stoic energy becomes so powerful. Because life will test you constantly. Stress. Rejection. Loss. Criticism. Failure. Disappointment. And in those moments, most people collapse emotionally. They react instantly. Speak impulsively. Make emotional decisions. But emotionally disciplined individuals operate differently. They pause. Observe. Think clearly. Then respond deliberately. That pause changes everything. Look at great leaders throughout history. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire filled with war, betrayal, political chaos, and uncertainty. Yet his writings constantly return to one principle. You control your mind or your mind controls you. That is the battle. Not the world outside you. The world inside you. Elite performers understand this deeply. Championship athletes train emotional control relentlessly. Military operators train calmness under chaos. High-level surgeons train steadiness under pressure. Because panic destroys precision. Emotion destroys clarity. That's the key. Controlled energy creates power. And most suffering in life is not created by events themselves. It is created by interpretation. Read that carefully. Events themselves are often neutral. Your interpretation creates suffering. Someone criticizes you. Now one person becomes emotionally destroyed. Another person remains calm and learns from it. Same event. Different interpretation. A relationship ends. One person views it as permanent devastation. Another views it as redirection and growth. Same event. Different interpretation. That means reality is often less painful than the story your mind creates around reality. Your mind creates the meaning. Repeat that to yourself. Your mind creates the meaning. This single realization changes everything. Because if your interpretation creates emotional suffering, then emotional discipline becomes possible. Now you are no longer a helpless victim of every external circumstance. Now you have agency. You have a choice. You can continue allowing your mind to create emotional chaos automatically. Or you can train yourself to interpret events differently. That is Stoic discipline. Stoicism teaches you to separate facts from emotional narratives. The fact is, someone disagreed with you. The narrative becomes, they disrespected me. Nobody values me. I must defend myself immediately. The fact is, you failed once. The narrative becomes, I am worthless. I will never succeed. The fact is, someone ignored your message. The narrative becomes, they must not care about me. Most people suffer inside interpretations they never question. And because they never pause, they never regain control. That is why silence matters so deeply. Silence creates space between stimulus and response. That space is power. Without silence, reactions become automatic. Someone insults you, reaction. Someone criticizes you, reaction. Something goes wrong, reaction. Now life controls you emotionally. But when silence enters the mind, awareness appears. Now you can observe emotion without obeying it instantly. That changes everything. Weak minds obey emotion immediately. Strong minds pause, observe, and choose deliberately. That's the key. Emotional discipline is not suppression. It is observation. You notice anger without becoming anger. You notice fear without becoming fear. You notice sadness without surrendering your entire identity to sadness. That is self-mastery. Most people never develop this ability because they mistake emotional intensity for authenticity. They believe, if I feel it strongly, I must express it immediately. Wrong. Emotion is information, not command. You do not have to obey every emotion that enters your mind. You do not need their permission to remain calm. That is one of the greatest forms of freedom a human being can develop. Imagine how different life becomes when external events stop controlling your nervous system constantly. Now criticism does not destroy your peace. Now setbacks do not destroy your confidence. Now delays do not destroy your discipline. Because your stability no longer depends entirely on external conditions. That is Stoic power. And understand something important. This is not natural for most people. It is trained. Daily. Silence becomes daily mental training. Every difficult moment becomes practice. Every emotional trigger becomes practice. Someone provokes you. Practice calmness. Something frustrates you. Practice patience. Someone misunderstands you. Practice restraint. That is how emotional discipline develops. Not through theory. Through repetition. That's the key. Most people want peace without training their mind. Impossible. A weak mind cannot create a peaceful life. Because chaos inside always creates chaos outside. That is why emotional discipline changes your entire reality. Your decisions improve. Your relationships improve. Your leadership improves. Your confidence improves. Because now logic begins overpowering emotional impulsiveness. And logic creates better outcomes long term. Think about how many problems come from temporary emotional decisions. Angry words. Impulsive actions. Revenge behavior. Emotional spending. Self-destructive habits. Most regret is emotional. Disciplined individuals understand this deeply. That is why they slow themselves down intentionally. Slow breathing. Slow speech. Slow reactions. Because slowing down weakens emotional impulsiveness. The average person lives mentally hijacked. Constant stimulation. Constant emotional reactions. Constant noise. But Stoic individuals protect their internal state carefully. They do not allow every event to enter their mind aggressively. That is emotional maturity. You have a choice. You can remain emotionally available to every distraction in the world. Or you can become internally disciplined enough to protect your peace. And protecting your peace is not weakness. It is intelligence. Because your mind becomes whatever you repeatedly practice. Practice outrage, become reactive. Practice distraction, become weak mentally. Practice silence, become clear. Practice emotional discipline, become powerful. That's the key. The quality of your life depends heavily on the quality of your internal state. And silence trains that state daily. Not because silence magically solves problems, but because silence allows awareness. Awareness of thoughts. Awareness of emotions. Awareness of reactions. And awareness creates choice. Without awareness, life becomes automatic. With awareness, life becomes intentional. That is Stoic mastery. Not becoming emotionless. Becoming deliberate. The world is filled with emotionally impulsive people. That is why emotionally disciplined individuals immediately stand out. Their calmness feels different. Their energy feels stable. Their presence feels grounded. Because they are no longer controlled by every emotional wave passing through their mind. And once you develop that ability, something powerful happens. Your inner world becomes quieter. Stronger. More focused. Now silence is no longer uncomfortable. Silence becomes strength. You learned how to control emotional reactions. Now you must learn something even deeper. How silence sharpens your ability to observe reality itself. Because the people who observe carefully always see what emotional people miss. Most people do not truly observe life. They react to it. Immediately. Emotionally. Automatically. And because they react so quickly, they miss everything. They miss intentions. They miss patterns. They miss manipulation. They miss truth. Because emotional reactions blind perception. That's the key. The more reactive you are, the less clearly you see. And the calmer you become, the more reality reveals itself naturally. This is why silence is so powerful. Silent observation reveals everything. People expose themselves when you stop interrupting. Read that carefully. People expose themselves when you stop interrupting. Most individuals reveal their character eventually through behavior, speech, emotional patterns, and consistency. But reactive people never notice it. Why? Because they are too busy reacting emotionally to observe carefully. They speak too much. Defend too quickly. Assume too fast. Interrupt constantly. And in doing so, they miss critical information. Strong observers understand something deeply. Silence gathers information. The person speaking constantly learns very little. The person observing quietly learns everything. That is power. Look at negotiations. The emotionally reactive negotiator talks too much. Explains too much. Reveals too much. Pushes emotionally. But disciplined negotiators understand silence strategically. They pause. Wait. Observe discomfort carefully. And often the other person begins revealing information voluntarily just to escape the silence. That's the key. Silence creates pressure. And pressure reveals people. The same thing happens in relationships. Emotionally reactive people become blinded by feelings. They ignore warning signs. Ignore inconsistency. Ignore manipulation. Because emotion distorts observation. But calm individuals notice patterns clearly. They observe behavior over words. Consistency over promises. Energy over performance. That changes everything. Because people often reveal themselves slowly. Manipulative individuals especially. At first they appear charming. Confident. Interesting. But if you remain emotionally grounded and observant long enough, the patterns appear. Control. Dishonesty. Insecurity. Emotional games. Silence allows you to see it clearly. Reactive people miss these signals because they become emotionally invested too quickly. That is why emotional detachment sharpens intelligence. Not coldness. Clarity. Observe more. React less. Repeat that to yourself. Observe more. React less. This single habit can transform your entire life. Because most mistakes come from reacting before fully understanding. People trust too quickly. Speak too quickly. Commit too quickly. Judge too quickly. And later they regret it. Why? Because they lacked stillness. Stillness creates perception. Most people cannot remain internally still long enough to see reality accurately. Their mind is constantly noisy. Fear. Assumption. Emotion. Insecurity. Overthinking. That internal noise distorts judgment. Noise creates confusion. Silence creates clarity. That's the key. Internal stillness sharpens intuition. And intuition is not magic. It is pattern recognition strengthened by calm awareness. Calm minds notice subtle things. Changes in tone. Inconsistencies in behavior. Emotional instability. Hidden intentions. Reactive minds miss these details completely. Because emotion narrows awareness. Think about leadership. Weak leaders react emotionally to every challenge. Every criticism becomes personal. Every disagreement becomes conflict. Every problem creates panic. Strong leaders observe before acting. They gather information first. They study people carefully. They understand emotional energy before making decisions. That creates authority. Because intelligence is not only about knowledge. It is about perception. And perception improves dramatically when emotional chaos disappears. You have a choice. You can continue reacting automatically to everything around you. Or you can become someone who observes carefully before responding. That shift changes relationships, business, decision-making, self-control. Everything changes. Because calm observation creates strategic advantage. Most people reveal their weaknesses openly when emotions take control. Angry people expose insecurity. Desperate people expose neediness. Manipulative people expose patterns eventually. But only observant individuals notice it consistently. That is why silence becomes protection. The less reactive you become, the harder you become to manipulate emotionally. Because now you are seeing clearly instead of reacting impulsively. And once you start seeing clearly, you stop wasting energy on the wrong people and situations. That alone can transform your life. Many people suffer unnecessarily because they ignore obvious patterns. Not because the patterns were hidden. Because emotional attachment blinded observation. That's the key. Emotion often sees what it wants. Silence sees what is real. This is why internally still individuals make better long-term decisions. They are not constantly hijacked by temporary emotional states. They can pause long enough to think rationally. That ability is rare today. Modern culture rewards instant reaction. Instant opinions. Instant outrage. Instant emotional expression. But instant reaction weakens wisdom. Wisdom requires observation. Observation requires silence. Silence requires discipline. And discipline creates power. Most people fear silence because silence forces awareness. Awareness of thoughts. Awareness of emotions. Awareness of reality. Distraction protects weak minds from self-confrontation. That is why so many people constantly consume noise. Music. Social media. Notifications. Entertainment. Drama. Anything to avoid internal stillness. But without stillness, clarity never develops. You cannot hear intuition inside mental chaos. You cannot think strategically while emotionally overloaded. That is why silence becomes mental training. Daily. Moments of observation without reaction. Moments of pause without impulsiveness. Moments of awareness without emotional noise. Over time, your mind becomes sharper, cleaner, more focused. Now you begin seeing things others miss completely. Patterns, motives, manipulation, opportunities. Because reactive people are too distracted emotionally to notice them. Observe more. React less. That is the discipline. Not suppressing emotion. Managing it. Allowing awareness to lead instead of impulse. And understand something important. Observation is not passivity. Observation is preparation. Weak people react immediately because they fear silence. Strong people observe carefully because they value accuracy. There is a massive difference. One creates chaos. The other creates control. You do not need their permission to slow down emotionally. You do not need to react instantly to prove confidence. In fact, delayed reaction often signals greater strength. Because controlled people choose timing deliberately. That is strategic thinking. And strategy always outperforms emotional impulsiveness long term. You have a choice. You can continue living emotionally distracted. Or you can become internally still enough to understand reality clearly. Because life changes dramatically once you stop reacting blindly. Now relationships become clearer. People become easier to understand. Manipulation becomes easier to detect. Decisions become more intelligent. Why? Because silence sharpens perception. And perception creates power. The loudest people rarely control the room. The most observant people do. That is the hidden advantage of silence. You learned how observation creates clarity. Now you must understand something even deeper. Why seeking respect from others destroys your internal power completely. Most people destroy their own respect by chasing it. That is the irony. The more desperately someone wants recognition, the weaker they appear psychologically. Because real respect cannot be forced. It cannot be demanded, manipulated, begged for, performed into existence. Real respect is earned through energy, discipline, consistency, and self-control. That's the key. Power never begs. Repeat that to yourself. Power never begs. Weak people constantly seek validation externally. Do they notice me? Do they admire me? Do they approve of me? Do they respect me? And because they need recognition emotionally, their behavior becomes desperate. They overtalk, overprove, overperform. But desperation always weakens attraction. Especially in relationships and business. Think carefully about this. Have you ever noticed how calm, grounded individuals naturally command attention without demanding it? They do not force themselves into conversations constantly. They do not seek approval aggressively. They do not chase admiration. Yet people notice them anyway. Why? Because silent confidence creates psychological weight. That is power. Meanwhile, emotionally needy people often do the opposite. They try too hard. Trying too hard to appear successful. Trying too hard to appear important. Trying too hard to appear respected. And ironically, the harder they chase respect, the less they receive it. Because people unconsciously trust calm certainty more than emotional desperation. That's the key. Neediness repels people. Not only romantically, professionally, socially, psychologically. Desperation creates pressure, and pressure pushes people away. This is why calm detachment becomes magnetic. Because detached individuals are emotionally self-contained. They are not constantly trying to extract validation from others. That changes their energy completely. Look at high-status individuals. Not fake status. Real status. People who truly know their value internally. They rarely force outcomes. They rarely chase aggressively. They rarely beg for attention or respect. Why? Because internally secure people do not operate from scarcity. Scarcity says, I must force people to value me. Confidence says, I already value myself. There is a massive difference. One creates emotional tension. The other creates calm authority. You have a choice. You can continue chasing external recognition emotionally. Or you can build internal respect first. Because respect starts internally before it appears externally. That truth changes everything. Most people want others to value them before they value themselves. Impossible. People mirror the standards you hold for yourself. That's the key. Your posture reflects self-respect. Your boundaries reflect self-respect. Your decisions reflect self-respect. Your silence reflects self-respect. Everything communicates your internal standards. Weak self-respect creates weak behavior. Tolerating disrespect constantly. Over-explaining constantly. Seeking approval constantly. But silent self-respect changes behavior naturally. Now you speak differently. Move differently. Respond differently. Because your identity changes internally first. You no longer tolerate things that destroy your peace. Not from arrogance. From discipline. That distinction matters. Self-respect is not ego. Ego screams, I need everyone to admire me. Self-respect says, I refuse to abandon myself for acceptance. That is strength. And most people never develop it because they are emotionally dependent on external validation. They fear rejection more than they value dignity. So they tolerate poor treatment, poor relationships, poor environments, poor standards. All because they fear losing approval. But emotionally disciplined people understand something deeper. Respect earned through self-betrayal is worthless. If you must become someone false just to be accepted, you are not respected. You are performing. That performance eventually becomes exhausting. Because fake confidence requires constant maintenance. Real confidence is quiet, stable, grounded. That is why silent confidence naturally commands attention. Not because it seeks power. Because it does not need to seek it. And people feel that immediately. Human beings unconsciously respond to emotional certainty. They trust people who appear internally stable. Not perfect. Stable. That is why emotionally grounded individuals often become leaders naturally. Their calmness creates trust. Their restraint creates authority. Their silence creates weight. Power never begs. Remember that. The moment you begin emotionally begging for validation, respect weakens instantly. Not because people are cruel. Because emotional desperation signals insecurity. And insecurity creates instability. This is especially obvious in relationships. People who chase constantly often lose attraction completely. Too many messages. Too much emotional pressure. Too much need for reassurance. Why? Because neediness suffocates freedom. Calm detachment creates space. And space creates attraction. That's the key. The strongest energy is often the least desperate energy. You do not need their permission to remain calm. You do not need to force people to recognize your value immediately. You do not need to convince everyone to respect you. Focus instead on becoming respectable internally. That changes everything. Because once self-respect develops deeply, behavior changes automatically. Now boundaries become stronger. Discipline becomes stronger. Emotional control becomes stronger. And strangely, external respect often appears naturally afterward. Why? Because people mirror certainty. Most people are attracted to grounded energy because grounded energy feels safe, predictable, stable, emotionally mature. Meanwhile, emotionally needy individuals create emotional exhaustion. Constant reassurance needed. Constant attention needed. Constant validation needed. That drains relationships. Business partnerships. Leadership. Everything. That is why internal stability matters so deeply. You cannot fake it long term. Eventually emotional desperation always leaks through behavior. That is why self-respect must become daily practice. Not theory. Practice. Keeping promises to yourself. Protecting your peace. Speaking with discipline. Walking away from disrespect calmly. That is self-respect in action. Not motivational quotes. Behavior. And once your behavior aligns with internal standards, confidence strengthens naturally. Not performative confidence. Real confidence. The kind that remains steady even when nobody applauds. The kind that survives rejection. The kind that remains calm under pressure. That is dangerous power. Because now your identity is no longer controlled by external opinions constantly. Now rejection does not destroy your worth. Criticism does not destroy your peace. Silence does not create insecurity. Because your value is internally anchored. That changes your entire reality. You stop chasing. Stop proving. Stop begging emotionally. And once that happens, people begin feeling your presence differently. Not because you demanded respect. Because you embodied it. That's the key. Respect is not requested. It is projected. Quietly. Through discipline, emotional control, and self-respect. You learned how to stop chasing recognition. Now you must learn how to build something even more powerful. A mind so calm that external chaos can no longer control it. Most people wake up already emotionally overwhelmed before the day even begins. Notifications, messages, stress, news, social media, noise. And because their mind is constantly overstimulated, they lose control of themselves. That is the modern epidemic. Not lack of intelligence. Lack of inner peace. Most people live controlled by external chaos. Their mood changes with every event, every opinion, every headline, every emotional interaction. Now their nervous system belongs to the world around them instead of themselves. That is weakness. Because a disturbed mind cannot think clearly. A disturbed mind cannot lead, cannot focus, cannot build power, cannot create peace. That's the key. Peace is power. Read that again. Peace is power. Not performative confidence. Not loudness. Not dominance. Peace. The ability to remain internally stable while chaos exists externally. That is rare. And rarity creates power. Most people lose emotional control immediately when life becomes uncomfortable. Traffic ruins their mood. Criticism ruins their mood. Delays ruin their mood. Stress ruins their mood. They become emotional prisoners of external circumstances. But Stoic silence creates something different. Emotional immunity. Not emotional numbness. Immunity. The ability to experience life without emotionally collapsing inside it. That changes everything. Because when your mind becomes difficult to disturb, your life changes permanently. Now pressure affects you less. Drama affects you less. Negativity affects you less. Why? Because your internal state is no longer fully controlled by the external world. That is freedom. Most people spend their lives trying to control external situations endlessly. But Stoic individuals focus first on controlling internal reactions. Because they understand something important. You cannot control everything around you. But you can train how you respond. That's the key. And the first step toward emotional strength is protecting your mental environment. Most people allow toxic energy unlimited access to their mind. Constant outrage. Constant gossip. Constant distraction. Constant emotional stimulation. Then they wonder why they feel anxious, exhausted, and mentally weak. Your environment shapes your nervous system. Read that carefully. Your environment shapes your nervous system. If you constantly consume chaos, your mind becomes chaotic. If you constantly consume negativity, your emotional state weakens. That is why silence becomes essential. Silence restores mental clarity. Modern culture is addicted to noise. People cannot sit quietly anymore. They need stimulation constantly. Music, videos, scrolling, arguments, entertainment. Anything to avoid stillness. But without stillness, the mind never resets. Now emotional tension accumulates daily. And slowly people lose the ability to think clearly. That is dangerous. Because distracted minds become weak minds. Weak minds are easily manipulated, emotionally reactive, impulsive, dependent on stimulation. But disciplined individuals protect mental clarity intentionally. They become selective about what enters their mind. That is maturity. Not everything deserves your attention. Not every opinion deserves emotional energy. Not every conflict deserves participation. You have a choice. You can continue feeding your mind chaos daily. Or you can build a mind strong enough to remain calm under pressure. That process begins with silence. Not silence as emptiness. Silence as recovery. Silence as discipline. Silence as mental training. Because calmness is trained, not inherited. That's the key. Some people think emotionally grounded individuals were simply born calm. Wrong. Calmness is practice. Daily practice. Breathing intentionally. Thinking intentionally. Responding intentionally. That is emotional conditioning. Elite performers understand this deeply. Athletes train breathing under pressure. Military personnel train calmness under stress. Meditation practitioners train awareness under distraction. Because nervous systems can be trained. And most people never train theirs. Instead, they strengthen anxiety daily. Stress daily. Distraction daily. Overstimulation daily. Then they wonder why their peace disappears easily. You cannot build a calm life with an undisciplined nervous system. Impossible. Peace is not accidental. Peace is practiced. That's the key. This is why solitude becomes powerful. Not loneliness. Solitude. There is a difference. Loneliness fears being alone. Solitude strengthens itself in silence. Most people avoid solitude because silence forces self-confrontation. Without distraction, unresolved emotions appear. Insecurity appears. Fear appears. Overthinking appears. So people run back to noise immediately. But emotionally strong individuals learn to sit with themselves calmly. That changes everything. Because once you become comfortable in silence, external chaos loses power over you. Now you no longer fear stillness. You no longer need constant stimulation to feel alive. You become internally grounded. That is dangerous strength. You do not need their permission to protect your peace. Remember that. Some people will call your calmness distant. Some people will call your boundaries cold. Some people will dislike your emotional discipline because they benefited from your emotional instability before. That is normal. Do not apologize for protecting your mind. A distracted world profits from your emotional weakness. That is why outrage culture spreads so aggressively. Emotionally triggered people are easier to control. Easier to distract. Easier to manipulate. But calm people think independently. That is power. This is why building an undisturbed mind requires daily discipline. Not occasional motivation. Daily discipline. Morning silence before stimulation. Deep breathing during stress. Moments of reflection without distraction. Intentional breaks from noise. These are not small habits. These are practices of power. Because every moment of stillness strengthens emotional control. And every moment of emotional control strengthens identity. Over time, something remarkable happens. Your reactions slow down. Your thoughts become clearer. Your emotional resilience grows stronger. Now situations that once overwhelmed you no longer control you. That is transformation. Not because life became easier. Because you became stronger internally. That's the key. Strong minds create stable lives. Weak minds create emotional chaos. And emotional chaos destroys peace, relationships, discipline, and focus. This is why emotional untouchability becomes so valuable. Not arrogance. Not emotional suppression. Emotional stability. The ability to remain centered while others lose control. Imagine how powerful that becomes in real life. During conflict. During pressure. During uncertainty. Now you are no longer reacting automatically like everyone else. Now you become the calmest nervous system in the room. And the calmest nervous system becomes the strongest energy in the room. That truth changes leadership, relationships, decision-making, everything. You have a choice. You can continue allowing the world to disturb your mind constantly. Or you can become disciplined enough to build inner peace intentionally. Because peace is not passive. Peace is power. And once your inner world becomes stable, your external reality begins changing naturally. You learned how to build emotional stability. Now you must understand something even deeper. Why silence and calmness make you naturally magnetic to other people. Most people try too hard. Too hard to impress. Too hard to be liked. Too hard to be noticed. Too hard to create attraction. And in doing so, they destroy the very thing they want. Because desperation weakens energy. That's the key. Desperation repels. Grounded certainty attracts. People are naturally drawn toward calm, grounded individuals because calmness communicates something powerful internally. I do not need to force attention to know my value. That energy changes everything. Especially in relationships. Romantic attraction. Leadership. Social respect. Business influence. All of it changes when emotional stability replaces emotional neediness. Most people think attraction is about appearance alone. Wrong. Energy matters deeply. And emotionally chaotic energy creates discomfort. Needy energy creates pressure. Desperate energy creates resistance. But calm energy creates trust. That's why silence becomes magnetic. Silence creates mystery. And mystery naturally attracts attention. Read that carefully. Mystery creates attraction. Not fake mystery. Not manipulation. Natural restraint. The ability to remain composed without constantly revealing everything about yourself emotionally. Most people overshare because they fear silence. They fear being forgotten. Misunderstood. Ignored. Unnoticed. So they talk excessively. Reveal too much. Explain too much. Seek reassurance constantly. And slowly their presence loses weight. Because oversharing reduces intrigue and authority. That's the key. Not everything needs to be explained. Repeat that to yourself. Not everything needs to be explained. Strong individuals understand this naturally. They do not reveal every emotion immediately. Not because they are hiding. Because they are disciplined. They understand that emotional control creates attraction. Meanwhile, emotionally reactive people reveal everything instantly. Every frustration. Every insecurity. Every opinion. Every emotional impulse. And over time people stop respecting their energy. Why? Because emotional impulsiveness signals instability. People trust calm energy more than emotional chaos. Always. Think about the most emotionally attractive individuals you have met. Usually they are not the loudest. Not the most desperate for attention. Not the most emotionally reactive. They are grounded. Calm. Comfortable with silence. Comfortable with themselves. That comfort creates emotional safety. And emotional safety creates attraction. This is true in leadership too. Employees trust calm leaders more than emotionally unstable leaders. Teams follow grounded energy more than chaotic energy. Because calmness communicates certainty. Imagine a crisis situation. One person panics emotionally. Talking rapidly. Overreacting. Creating tension. Another person remains composed. Breathes slowly. Speaks clearly. Who naturally gains authority? The calm one. Always. Because composed individuals stabilize environments. And stability creates trust. That's the key. People are attracted to emotional stability because emotional stability feels safe. This is why silence becomes powerful socially. Not because silence itself is magical. Because disciplined silence reveals self-control. And self-control is rare. Especially today. Modern culture rewards constant broadcasting. Constant updates. Constant emotional exposure. Constant attention seeking. People post every thought. Every emotion. Every reaction. And slowly they lose mystery completely. Nothing remains private. Nothing remains protected. Everything becomes performance. But powerful people understand something different. Privacy protects energy. Silence protects identity. And emotional restraint protects attraction. You have a choice. You can continue chasing validation emotionally. Or you can become grounded enough to let people discover your value naturally. That changes everything. Because attraction grows strongest when energy is relaxed instead of forced. This is especially obvious in relationships. Desperate people often suffocate attraction. Too much pressure. Too much reassurance needed. Too much emotional dependence. Meanwhile, detached confidence creates space. And space creates curiosity. That's why calm individuals often become magnetic without trying. They are not emotionally grasping for connection constantly. They are internally stable first. That stability creates confidence. Not performative confidence. Real confidence. The kind that does not panic when silence appears. The kind that does not chase attention aggressively. The kind that remains grounded even without validation. That is powerful energy. And people feel it immediately. Because emotionally secure individuals communicate abundance unconsciously. Not material abundance. Internal abundance. An abundance mindset says, I do not need to force outcomes. Scarcity mindset says, if I lose this attention, I lose value. That internal difference changes behavior dramatically. Scarcity creates desperation. Abundance creates calmness. That's the key. The energy of someone who no longer chases becomes naturally attractive. Why? Because they stop operating from fear. Fear of rejection. Fear of abandonment. Fear of being unseen. Now their actions become calmer, cleaner, more intentional. And ironically, people become more drawn to them afterward. Not because they manipulated anyone. Because grounded energy feels rare in a desperate world. You do not need their permission to remain emotionally detached. And detached does not mean cold. Detached means emotionally self-controlled. There is a difference. Cold people suppress emotion. Detached individuals manage emotion intelligently. That distinction matters deeply. Because emotional discipline creates freedom. Now you are no longer controlled by every emotional fluctuation in relationships or social environments. Now silence no longer feels threatening. Now space no longer creates panic. Now uncertainty no longer destroys your peace. That changes attraction completely. Because calmness under uncertainty signals emotional maturity. And emotional maturity is deeply magnetic. Most people become emotionally chaotic the moment they feel insecure. Double texting. Over-explaining. Seeking reassurance constantly. But emotionally disciplined individuals pause. Observe. Trust themselves. That creates strength. And strength attracts naturally. This applies beyond romance too. In business, grounded individuals often gain more opportunities because they appear emotionally stable. In leadership, calm individuals gain trust because people feel safe around their energy. Socially, emotionally disciplined people become respected because they are not emotionally exhausting to interact with. That's the key. People are drawn toward peace, not chaos. And silence creates peace internally. Especially when silence comes from confidence instead of insecurity. You have a choice. You can continue leaking energy chasing validation. Or you can build a presence so grounded that attraction happens naturally. That process begins internally. Through self-respect, emotional discipline, calmness, silence. And once those qualities become part of your identity, something changes permanently. You stop needing to force yourself into people's awareness. Your presence begins speaking for itself. Now your silence carries weight. Your calmness carries authority. Your energy carries confidence. Because you are no longer emotionally chasing. You are internally anchored. That is magnetic power. You learned how silence transforms attraction. Now we arrive at the final lesson. The ultimate transformation. How to become emotionally untouchable in a world addicted to chaos. Most people are mentally owned by the world around them. Owned by opinions. Owned by criticism. Owned by rejection. Owned by social pressure. Owned by emotional chaos. That is why they never experience true peace. Because every external event gains access to their mind immediately. Someone criticizes them, their mood changes. Someone ignores them, their confidence collapses. Someone disagrees with them, their emotions explode. Now their inner world belongs to strangers. That is dangerous. Because if the world controls your mind, the world controls your life. That's the key. Your mind is your kingdom. Repeat that to yourself. Your mind is your kingdom. And kingdoms without protection eventually become invaded. Most people do not protect their mental space carefully. They allow endless negativity inside. Endless distraction. Endless emotional influence. And over time, their identity weakens. Not because they lack potential. Because they lack boundaries. Inner mastery means protecting mental space fiercely. Not selfishly. Wisely. You do not need their permission to protect your peace. Remember that. Some people will always try to pull you into emotional chaos. Drama. Arguments. Negativity. Validation games. Why? Because emotionally unstable people often feel uncomfortable around emotionally disciplined people. Your calmness exposes their chaos. Your silence exposes their impulsiveness. Your discipline reminds them of what they avoid within themselves. So they try to provoke reactions. But emotionally untouchable people no longer surrender their minds so easily. That is the transformation. Not becoming cold. Becoming sovereign internally. Most people react automatically because they have never trained self-awareness deeply. Every opinion enters their mind immediately. Every criticism becomes personal. Every emotional trigger gains control instantly. But strong individuals filter information carefully. They ask, does this deserve access to my peace? That question changes everything. Because not every opinion deserves emotional weight. Not every criticism deserves reaction. Not every person deserves access to your nervous system. That's the key. Emotional boundaries create mental freedom. Weak minds absorb everything emotionally. Strong minds choose carefully what enters their inner world. And once you begin protecting your mind intentionally, life changes dramatically. Now distractions weaken. Negativity weakens. Manipulation weakens. Because your inner world becomes organized instead of chaotic. That organization creates power. The strongest person needs the least validation. Read that carefully. The strongest person needs the least validation. Why? Because true confidence is internal. Not performative. Not dependent on applause. Internal. Most people exhaust themselves trying to prove their worth endlessly. Trying to look successful. Trying to sound intelligent. Trying to appear important. But the more someone needs recognition emotionally, the more fragile their confidence becomes. Because external validation is unstable. People praise you today and criticize you tomorrow. If your confidence depends entirely on external reactions, your identity will constantly collapse emotionally. That is why silence becomes identity, not technique. This is bigger than communication. Bigger than body language. Bigger than social strategy. Silence becomes a way of existing internally. A calm identity. A disciplined identity. A grounded identity. Now you no longer react impulsively to everything around you. You no longer chase approval endlessly. You no longer explain yourself constantly. Because your self-worth is internally anchored. That changes everything. Your decisions become cleaner. Your relationships become healthier. Your mind becomes quieter. Your discipline becomes stronger. Because internally secure people stop leaking emotional energy everywhere. That's the key. The less you need validation, the more powerful your presence becomes. Not because you force authority. Because calm certainty naturally projects authority. People feel it unconsciously. A person who remains grounded under pressure immediately stands out in a chaotic world. Why? Because emotional discipline is rare. Most people are controlled by emotion constantly. Fear controls them. Approval controls them. Anger controls them. Attention controls them. But emotionally untouchable individuals operate differently. They still feel emotion. But they are not enslaved by it. That is mastery. And every chapter of this journey has pointed toward one truth. Mastery over self changes external reality. That's the core lesson. Not manipulation. Not performance. Not pretending to be strong. Real inner control. Because the world responds differently to calm certainty. People trust emotionally stable individuals more. Respect emotionally disciplined individuals more. Follow emotionally grounded individuals more. That is reality. And the beautiful part is this. You do not need to force it. You become it internally first. Then the external world responds naturally afterward. That is how transformation truly works. From the inside out. Not the outside in. Most people spend their lives trying to change external circumstances without changing themselves internally. Impossible. External chaos will always return if internal chaos remains untouched. That is why silence matters so deeply. Silence transforms identity. Silence transforms discipline. Silence transforms relationships. Silence transforms destiny. Because silence trains awareness. Awareness trains control. Control trains confidence. Confidence changes behavior. Behavior changes reality. That's the chain. And once you understand that, you stop viewing silence as emptiness. Now silence becomes power. The power to observe without reacting. The power to walk away without explaining. The power to remain calm under pressure. The power to protect your peace fiercely. That is emotional freedom. You have a choice. You can continue living emotionally controlled by the world around you. Or you can become someone internally untouchable. Someone who protects their mind carefully. Someone who does not surrender emotional control easily. Someone who understands that peace is power. Not because life becomes easy. Because you become stronger. And strength built through silence lasts longer than strength built through performance. The world may remain chaotic. People may remain reactive. Noise may continue endlessly. But your mind no longer needs to participate in that chaos. That is sovereignty. That is discipline. That is mastery. Your mind is your kingdom. Protect it. Train it. Strengthen it. And once your inner world becomes disciplined, your external world begins changing naturally. Because reality always responds differently to a person who no longer needs to prove their power. They simply embody it. Silently. The world trained you to react. To defend yourself. To explain yourself. To seek approval. To chase attention. To prove your worth endlessly. But power was never found in noise. Power was found in control. The moment you stop reacting emotionally, you begin thinking clearly. The moment you stop chasing validation, you begin respecting yourself. The moment you stop explaining your every move, your presence becomes stronger than your words. Silence is not emptiness. Silence is discipline. Silence is observation. Silence is emotional mastery. Silence is inner power. Most people will spend their entire lives controlled by emotion, distracted by noise, desperate for approval. Do not become one of them. Become calm. Become disciplined. Become untouchable. And starting today, practice the rarest skill in the modern world. The ability to remain silent while everyone else loses control.